What was the creepiest or most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? I dropped my mug onto the floor accidentally. Heard no noise when it hit the floor. Go to pick it up and it's gone. I honestly went to bed and pondered what happened and slept feeling incredibly uncomfortable. Edit. Jesus Christ, this kicked off more than expected. Obligatory thanks for the gold. And alas, I never did find the mug. Still bothers me to this day. One afternoon in college I came back from classes and decided to sit on the couch and have a snack. After that I just passed out. I had a nightmare of some bloody-faced demonish thing screaming in my ear at the top of its lungs. Woke up and went about the rest of my day. My roommate comes back later that night and goes into his room as I'm sitting in the main living area. At some point he lets out this random startled scream which leads to me running down the hall to see what's going on. He looks at me and goes, "I swear to God someone with a bloody face just walked from your bedroom into the bathroom." Double quote. I never told him about my nightmare I had earlier in the day. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Nothing ever happened again. When I was in college I house sat for my parents. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, so I locked every door leading up to the bedroom when I went to bed at night. I had the weirdest dream that someone unlocked each door and turned on every light. I felt cold and woke up to my dog barking. All of the lights in the house were on and every door open and unlocked. My dog wouldn't stop barking at nothing in the hallway. I sat in the shower with my dog and I phoned the rest of night scared to death. My grandmother's house had a very distinct smell. Nothing bad though. Just a grandmother's house smell. Anyway, when she came to visit us she always used to sit in a specific chair in the living room. Shortly after she passed away, my father, my older sister and myself came home, and when we walked into the living room and we all smelled her. My dad said hello Ethel and the smell disappeared. I would be skeptical if just one of us experienced this, but it was all three of us. My boyfriend and I woke up in separate parts of the house in hysterics. Naked and covered in sweat. When we both finally calmed down and talked we realized we had the same dream of being surrounded by a group of black and white people with no mouths. A lady's voice coming from my closet asking for help. My closet door was cracked and she said, "Help me. I see you through the cracks." Every synonym for the word scared was coursing through my body. I went and checked to see if there was a woman in need of help, but nothing was in there but my clothes and shoes. When I was about 5 or 6, I was sitting on the back deck of my family home. An old farmhouse. I remember this old lady walking up the steps and going straight into the house without acknowledging me. I follow her inside to see who it is, and my mom is standing in the kitchen room right off the back deck. I ask her who's here and she gives this confused look. Around that time, the original owner of the farmhouse died and I am 100% convinced it was her. My grandfather passed away when I was 8 and my little brother was 2 or 3ish. He had this big laserboy chair in the living room that he always planted himself in. Everyone knew this chair was grandpa's chair. Double quote. Anyway, we went down to my grandparents' house in Florida for a long weekend to attend the funeral, etc. We're all chatting the first night there in the living room. And my mom was sitting in the laserboy chair. My little brother goes up to my mom and says grandpa wants his chair back. My mom asks him where grandpa is, thinking he probably didn't understand death. To which he responds, "He's right behind you." Double quote. My mom bolted off that sofa immediately. Somewhat ironically, something happened to me last night. I got home from work very early in the morning. 2:30 AM. My house has an entryway or mudroom before you actually get into the house. I open the front door, step inside, close front door and proceed to try and find the key to get through the next door to get into my house. So the only light in this entryway is through the glass on the front door. The rest of the room is completely black and I can barely see my hands in front of my face. All of a sudden I start to hear this buzzing, vibrating noise behind me off to the right. House is old, so maybe just weird house noises. Still looking for the key when I notice that the noise is getting louder, closer, and it has risen in pitch to something like if a woman was humming loudly. Maybe it's just ringing in my ear. Out of the corner of my eye I see a shadow that I thought was from light reflecting outside. Moved towards me, creeping along the wall. That's when I noticed the vibrating noise was also getting closer to me, and it seemed to be coming in the same direction as the now moving shadow. I'm shitting my pants trying to open this damn door, and when I finally do, the noise stops. The shadow disappears, and I'm hoping it was all in my head. I was sleeping in my basement, pretty much my bedroom, and I woke up at some random time in the night for no reason. Rolled over and saw a black figure. Probably around 5 feet 10 inches and typical male physique. Standing at the side of my bed. It was standing between the bed and the stairs, so there was no way to nope out. I just rolled over and straight up started praying. I rolled back over and it was gone. The next morning I was in the shower, also in the basement, and the curtain was pushed to the side. Not like all the way, but it noticeably moved. Then when I got out of the shower, my cello's D string was plucked 3 times, then wrung out, which was laying against my chair in the basement. Then I went upstairs and my brother had a handprint that reached across his neck and cheek. It was too big to be his hand, but he was perfectly fine and he slept through the night uninterrupted. 20 or so years ago, while living in NM, driving east on HWY 60 at night between Vaughan and FT Sumner. 2 of us in the car and noticed a really bright light on the right rear side. I mean really bright. We then remembered that the train tracks were there. So we kept driving without really thinking about it. Well, the light stayed with us, which was weird because trains usually don't go that fast out there. So then my friend rolls down the window and look back to see WTH it is, and suddenly the light vanishes. Also no sound. So now we're a little freaked. We pull over to check things out. Well, a new realization sets in. There are no train tracks next to the road on this section of road 34. 486,698. Minus 104. 776,733. So now we're really freaked out and bolt out of our sap. We told our story to people at work and of course caught some grief, but that's what happened to us. Edit. Sorry. Can't get map link to work using my phone. In the house I grew up in, it always felt like you were being watched. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye and dark mists that would dissolve when you looked straight at them. My older sister was always scared of the attic. Especially, she would barricade the door when we were left home alone. I went in the attic quite often to get various things. It's where we kept large toy containers, old clothes and stuffed animals. And I just liked seeing what I could find. It always felt like I was being watched. Though, one time I went up there, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a large, translucent alien-shaped white head looking at me from behind a box. I froze, terrified, and locked eyes with it for a few seconds before it slowly lowered itself down to hide. I turned right back around and left, telling myself I had imagined it. But scared to go in the attic for years after that. I didn't tell anyone for years. My parents eventually sold the house and we moved. And I've never felt the same way anywhere else I've lived. I used to have this reoccurring nightmare about this lizard man type monster who could see what I could see out of my eyes. So I'd run and hide and he didn't know where I was. But then as soon as I peeked to see if it was safe, he'd know where I was. So I'd have to leave that hiding spot and go find a new one, and then it would happen over and over and over again. A literal nightmare. Very Kafkaesque. And X200B. And X200B. But here is the real spooky part. I once mentioned the lizard man to my dad. And he got super white in the face and his voice was all shaky and he just said, "This dream took place at our house in East St. Paul? The one with the apartments right behind it?" And I said yes. That's where I'd always go to hide. "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because I have the exact same dream." And I don't know if it was just the way he said it or just the overall situation or both. But I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's quite chilling. At a nursing home. Working 10 PM to 8 AM. First, I took care of 16 ladies as a CNA on night duty. On my own. The halls have 16 rooms. With a sister hall. Same layout. Next door. Only separated by a sliding door. There's a nurse that oversees the 2 adjoining halls but never saw her much, so it got lonely. As it was a nursing home, the ladies who live there are older and can get really sick really fast. One lady was sent to the hospital for pneumonia and was gone 4 days. One night. Around 3 AM. Another lady, same hall neighbor to the lady at the hospital, started screaming, "Get him out of my room." Thinking a male resident had wandered from the other side of the building, I ran over to her room. But I didn't see anything. Now. This is a lady who is very with it and never has behaviors or hollers out. But she is hysterical. I figure she had a bad dream and try to calm her down. It took about 15 minutes. When I leave her room, the nurse is on the phone. The lady at the hospital had died 15 minutes ago. There are ghosts that walk the halls. And dark forms I see in certain corners of certain halls. So I guess I was never really alone. The very first hotel that I worked at. I started at the front desk and worked 3 PM to 11 PM shift. There was someone there with me from 2 PM to 10 PM. So I always had a little more than an hour where I was alone at the desk. Our kitchen closed at 10 PM, so usually by 10:15 PM. It was only the bartender and I still there. One night. It was almost 11 PM and there was a huge noise that came from the kitchen area. The bartender and I ran back there and saw that every single pot, pan, ladle, spoon, everything else that was hanging from the ceiling racks were on the ground. After our shift, we watched the camera back and there was no one in the kitchen when it happened. I have no explanation for it other than it was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me and I could not get out of there fast enough. I was driving to pick up my friend from the airport around 10 at night. His girlfriend was also with me as she wanted to see him as soon as possible. We were going down some dark, super lonely back road. I've never been that way before. But I was following good old Apple Maps. Eventually we came up alongside a train that was matched with our speed. So we couldn't see out past it on the right side of the car. After a couple minutes of that, we came upon a train yard on our left. A very spooky, very generic horror movie train yard. Nothing crazy yet. Except for the fact that it went on and on and on. We probably spent 10 minutes driving at 45 miles an hour down a dark back road with a train yard on our left and a train on our right blocking the view. Eventually we made it back into society and picked up my friend from the airport. We told him all about the spooky train yard and train and were excited to drive back and show him just how much it was like a generic horror film. We drove back down the same roads. It wasn't there. We never passed a train yard. There were no trains on the tracks. Now on our left. Friend's girlfriend and I flipped out. We swore up and down we drove right along the train yard for a long time. The drive home felt much shorter. I remember I was camping one time with friends from high school. We had decided to sleep around the fire, not inside of tents, since it would be nice to sleep under the stars. I fell asleep in the chair after a while, but I woke up to very loud screaming from the forest surrounding the campground. It sounded exactly like a friend of mine who was sleeping right by me and I didn't see him in his chair anymore. I woke up the person next to me asking where he went, and then my friend who I thought was screaming was across sleeping elsewhere on a bench. I then went okay and fell asleep immediately. The next morning I was asking people about the screaming and nobody else heard it but me, and I'm not sure what made it. Sorry if bad formatting. Using mobile. Not creepy. But definitely paranormal. I was about 17. And was in my bedroom crying my eyes out over something. Home could be difficult at times. And that evening I was really upset. I really needed someone to talk to. But the only phone in the house was downstairs where my parents were, so calling a friend wasn't an option. I didn't know what to do to deal with the crap I was trying to live with and really felt that it couldn't go on for much longer. I remember thinking, please, someone, just help me. Not a prayer as such. I'm not really sure if that does any good. More sort of a mental scream into the void. There was definitely no one in the room with me. It was a tiny room, and I had my back to a chest of drawers. And then I felt a something on my left shoulder. As if someone was standing behind me and resting their hand on me. I could feel the weight of each individual finger. And the palm cupping my shoulder. And I could feel warmth from it. It didn't scare me. But it was enough to stop me crying. I guess the feeling lasted for a minute or so and then just stopped. I have no idea what it was. But it was enough to calm me down. I wish I could feel it again. I'm a paranormal investigator, so I live for the creepy and paranormal. I seek it out. I've experienced a lot of creepy things. A while back we investigated the Sally house in Atchison, Kansas. This house is notorious for paranormal activity and the owners lease it to investigators. We'd already been there a few hours in the dark with no major incidents and had our equipment set up all over the place. We'd arranged toys on the floor in Sally's room. It's said that Sally will move them if you do that. We'd just finished a dinner break in the kitchen downstairs and went upstairs to check the equipment. When we got to the top of the stairs, the door to Sally's room was closed. None of us had closed it. Someone knocked on the door and asked, "Is anyone in there?" Double quote. We heard a distinctly male voice say, "No. Just leave." Double quote. I need to point out. We were all downstairs together. No one had gone upstairs to close the door. But any investigator will tell you in old houses doors sometimes close. No men were upstairs. We had 2 men in our group. Both downstairs. We lived in a house a few years back. And random things would just go missing. Then they'd turn up somewhere else. We never really thought hard on it cause they were never expensive or important things. So because of this none of us ever mentioned it to each other. Fast forward and mum loses an earring. Not a huge deal, but it's a nice dangly pair she wears frequently. Maybe a month later I come home and find it perfectly laid out in the middle of the ground at the end of a high traffic hallway. It has 3 doors at the end. Take a photo and show mum when she gets back. Give her back her earring and we discuss the oddity. I mention that lately I've been misplacing random inconsequential stuff like staplers. And she looks at me and she goes, "That's weird." Me too. Our housemate gets home and we mention it and he goes, "Oh man, so weird. My razor vanished for a while and I found it back on my sink one day." So basically we're all convinced there was a friendly ghost attached to that house that just misplaced things to let us know they were present. My friends were all hanging out at my rich friend's parents' old mansion that was super extremely haunted. He had lots of enthusiastic golden retrievers that balanced out the palpable ghost-ridden environment. Other than that it was just 5 of us guys. Once in a while something small happened that we dismissed. Something moving. Weird creepy whispering. Dark areas of the house being creepy. All the furniture was from the early 20th century. But one time we were all sitting outside on his patio and hanging out chatting. My friends were smoking some cigarettes. Some hitting a roar. In the middle of conversation there was this loud ethereal operatic singing coming from slightly above us. Came out of nowhere. It was extremely bizarre and we all stopped, looked at each other. Freaked out and ran. We all sat down at a huge dinner table inside the house and tried to rationalize it but couldn't. To this day that is the only not explainable paranormal thing that has happened to me. I was in my room, on the 2nd floor, and I saw a girl, which I thought was my sister, in the hall walk past my room into my sister's room. Then I went to go ask her a question assuming my sister would be in her room, but when I turned out of my door her room was empty and had the lights off. I went downstairs to find her in the kitchen, and when I asked if she was upstairs at all she told me she had been in the kitchen the whole time. My mom and I visited my grandma at her senior home and left at like 10 PM. I went out the front doors and bumped straight into this dude's chest. I said sorry and backed away, but when he didn't respond I felt a bit weirded out and looked up to see this huge tall middle-aged dude. I think he was like 7 feet, with a black fedora and black suit and really wide eyes and a briefcase. He had huge wide eyes. And he kept staring at me without blinking or saying a word. Then my mom called for me to hurry up and follow her to the car. When we got in the car I asked her who she thought that man was. She said, "What man?" I explained what literally just happened and she said she didn't see any man. I turned around and the dude was gone. Creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Edit. Everyone here is saying I bumped into death. I never thought about that before. I thought it was just some weird dude who somehow quietly got in the door even though it has a welcome beep. But I guess it was at a senior home and it's right next to a cemetery. So it makes sense. And now I feel even more creeped out by this memory. Thanks everyone. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, so this one freaked me out. My parents own a 300-acre ranch in George West, Texas. My stepdad and mother are going out of town for a week and asked me to look after the animals. I decide to spend the week there in the guest house and make myself comfortable. Now this ranch is in the middle of nowhere and the nearest neighbor is probably like 10 miles down the road. One night I finish feeding the cows and decide to take a walk in the woods behind the cow pen. It was probably like 2300-ish and I'm scanning the woods with a flashlight and just walking. I remember taking my phone out because I had thought I felt it vibrate. Phantom vibration. The screen reads 2323. But there is no signal. Okay, whatever. Seconds later I hear what sounds like a woman singing a lullaby. I freak the FCK out and become paralyzed due to shock. I CCK my shotgun. Always had it with me in case snakes or coyotes. Scan the woods with flashlight in hand. I don't see anything. But the singing is getting louder. I ran out of there like a little girl and went back to the guest house. Never found out what it was. I wrote this in another post. But it applies here as well. When I was in high school, I'd have my then girlfriend over to my house almost every day. Every night I'd have to drive her home. And since I was like 16 I had the whole no driving after 9:00 feet thing. So I'd drive her home at like 8:30 and get back on my road at around 9:00. Whenever I'd turn off onto my road, I'd go up it about half a mile and see this girl, like a teenager, in a blue dress with a light blue ribbon tied around her waistline, walking down the road. It was around fall and she was barefoot and grinning ear to ear with mascara stains running down her face from some heavy duty crying. I told my then girlfriend the story. And she didn't really believe me. It happened the next 3 nights. And each time I just stared at her. My heart beating hard in my chest. I never stopped to see what was the deal, so who in their right mind would? The 4th night I waited until 10:00 to bring my girlfriend home. Then when I turned onto my road, I pulled out my phone to film the rest of the trip. I didn't see anything. And I haven't seen her since. I was 15ish and babysitting a neighbor girl down the road from my parents' house. The house was older. But I never thought it was creepy. They also had this awful rat terrier that would bark at everything. Worst dog ever. Once the girl went to bed, I sat in the living room and was watching TV. The dog started freaking out. But instead of barking at the door like normal, she started barking at the corner of the room. Then she would run to another room and bark and come back to where I was like she was following something. Finally she stayed in the kitchen barking for a solid 2 minutes. Afraid that she was going to wake the girl up. I went into the kitchen to quiet her down. When I walked in I froze and saw that every single cabinet door in the kitchen was open. All of them. I grabbed the dog and ran to the living room. After she stopped barking, I went back into the kitchen and closed everything. Thankfully the dad finally came home soon after. I refused to go back and my parents never believed me. I still get freaked out when I think about it. Earlier today I made a negative comment about Scientology related to their stalking, false imprisonment, and kidnapping on this. First one was me and my cousins were in the basement playing video games while the adults were at the hospital for our sick grandma. The doors on the 3rd floor started shaking and the dogs were going crazy. When we went up it stopped and we got THR call our grandma passed. Second one would be when I was younger. I was at a buddy's and my mom called me to come home. I left on my bike and when I got home my family was crying and freaked out. I asked what was wrong and they asked me where the hell was I. I eventually looked at the clock and it took me over 3 hours to get home from my buddy's house that was like 4 blocks away. I still to this day have no idea what happened and don't remember the bike ride home. When I was a kid, a friend and I were at a park. We were about to walk back through the park field. He asked to hurry, so we decided to run race. We started to run. And we were there. Across the field. I went, "Dude, what just happened?" And he went, "Did we only take 2 steps?" It was so f***ing weird that he too felt like we only took a few steps. I do remember what it felt like though. He started to run while looking down. And I quickly followed while looking down. All I see is a quick blur of the grass. And some wind through my ears. Stop once we get the concrete of the sidewalk. And freak out. Time sped up or some shit. IDK. This was a couple of years ago. But I still remember it vividly. It kind of happened in a dream. The dream itself wasn't that creepy. In fact, it was very pleasant. In my dream, I spent the day with my step-grandfather. He tried to teach me how to golf. We jogged together and ended the day at his house. He needed help cleaning out his room up in the attic. And I was happy to help. As we were cleaning, though, I started to notice a theme between all the items we got rid of. Old baseball cards, baseball caps, his entire Stratomatic records. All of these things were very important to him. When I asked him why we were getting rid of these things, he just told me that he didn't need them anymore. It was about them that the dream ended. The creepy bit came when I woke up. That morning, my parents broke the news to me that my step-grandfather had passed away in his sleep. As for all the things he and I threw away in the dream, those were all given to us in his will. My wife and I spent a night at the haunted Hillview Manor. We captured the following scream on tape. No one around. No one else heard it. Scared me shitless. No explanation. I watched my cat from inside my house. Cat was sitting in the garden and looking in a different direction. As if looking for some birds to catch. I randomly thought, what if cats could hear thoughts? And immediately she turns around and looks me straight in the eyes from like 50-meter distance. I was pretty sure I didn't make any noise to get her attention. Anyways, I don't believe she heard my thoughts, lol. She probably heard some noise from that direction, but it was creepy AF. My partner and I were driving along a road and we see this shape in the middle of the road. It looks like it could be a kangaroo, but the closer we get to it the more human it looks. But kind of oversized. It is surrounded by a bunch of smaller shapes. We start to think maybe it's a giant bird. Because it looks feathery, but it's definitely human shaped. But not quite. Like it had monstrous features. We're driving slower now. Like walking speed, and I'm frantically telling my partner to drive around it and not leave the car, because that's how you get murdered. We see the little shapes closer and they're plastic chairs. Surrounding a big ass scarecrow. Now you think knowing it's not an actual monster would help calm you down, but a friggin' scarecrow surrounded by small chairs in the middle of a quiet road at night doesn't ease any mood. We laugh about it now, but it freaked me the FCK out. Not me. But my mom. She grew up in a ranch house in Colombia that used to be some kind of epidemic ward. When she was little, she and one of her sisters saw little white gowns floating around their bed at night. They were obviously terrified and fought against sleeping in that room so fiercely that my grandmother actually had a priest come and bless the room to set their minds at ease. After that, no more floating gowns. I was on call at a hospital, med student, and as I was going to leave for the night, I walked the long, empty hallway to return my pager. As I returned down that hall, I stopped in my tracks when I noticed a woman limping down the hall toward me, sobbing and crying, "Help me." Mind you, it was 2 AM and no one should be in that part of the hospital. Anyway, I thought she was a ghost. She wasn't. She fell off a stripper pole and hit her head. In her fugue state, she stole a key card and meandered into the halls from the ED. I was 8 years old on Christmas Eve and lived on the 3rd floor of a large house that was converted into apartments. I had trouble falling asleep. I saw a boy floating outside my window wearing one of those old beanie hats with the propeller on top. I threw the covers over my head and eventually fell asleep. The next morning my parents told me that they saw a figure of a small boy sitting at the end of their bed and asked if it was me. Which it was not. A few years later, we had some plumbing work done and they had to tear up the floorboards. An old book was found that had pictures of the property from about 60 years prior. There was a picture of the boy I saw in there and it turns out that he was shot during a hunting accident on the property and died. Still freaks me out to this day. I work at a relatively old building. 200 years old maybe? Used to be a hospital. Typical. But there's some toilets not often used because they're in an awkward place. On several occasions I've heard someone whisper my name despite the fact the area is empty. On one occasion I heard them say my name followed by watch out. Nothing bad happened. Or has happened. Probably my mind filling the quiet. I've dreamt about each one of my grandparents the night before they died and can still vividly remember each dream. I rarely remember even dreaming throughout the night. 7 years old grandma who I barely knew, 9 years old grandpa who lived in another state and wasn't till 17, grandpa who had just gotten a clean bill of health and died in his sleep of a heart attack, 24, grandma who was in another state, 28, grandma who I hadn't seen in 10 years. I have one grandparent left who is 92. I'm dreading the night I dream of him. About a year ago I was in my living room and my parents go upstairs to bed, so I moved to the bigger couch. I sit down and no more than 2 seconds later I hear 3 distinct knocks on the wall right behind my head. What made it worse was there was a window too, so I fully expected to see someone. But there was nothing. Me and my dad even grabbed flashlights to look outside and found nothing. I tried to replicate the knock like maybe I caused it. Nope. It was literally 3 knocks on the wall and I had zero clue what it was. I was camping with my friend around Mamtour in England. Apparently there is a lot of activity around there because a few people have crashed landed there in past. And it is very old, so there are quite a few legends. Anyway, me being me, I thought nothing of it. And then as the night went on we were chatting around the fire and in the distance I can clearly make out a guy wearing an orange shirt walking up to our tent around the side. We were in the corner of this campsite, so I just assumed he needed a piss and was making his way to the wall. And then all of a sudden he kind of lurched down as if he was going to start sprinting and he just collapsed and melted into the ground. I looked horrified for a couple of seconds and asked my friends if they saw anything and they said they didn't. I was like 9 or 10 and sitting in my oldest brother's room, which is in the basement, playing Mario Kart Double Dash. Usually I didn't like being in the basement because it gave me bad vibes. But this time my brothers and their friends were out in the living room area playing Halo. My brother poked his head in and told me if that they were going to McDonald's, which was like 10-15 minutes away. I was like, cool, I'm about to beat Rainbow Road on 100cc. They leave. I finish up my game and then I hear this huge crash upstairs. I'm like, oh crap, one of the dogs just hurt themselves. I run up there and everything is fine, but our 2 dogs were staring down this chair that had been tipped over. I think nothing of it and go back to play some more Mario Kart. I start to race and get like 2 laps in when all of a sudden the gamma cube says the disc can't be read. I open the disc tray to clean it and there is nothing in there. The game had been put back in its case. That room is also the same place I would have super freaky sleep paralysis dreams. I was driving into work one morning on the highway, I always do. As I'm trucking along I notice that the car ahead of me has a rear passenger and they seem to be looking at me. Now, mind you, I'm doing about 65 miles per hour and while my eyesight isn't bad, it also isn't 20/20, but regardless this person seems to be staring me down. Initially I don't pay it a lot of attention since it may just be a kid or someone trying to get a rise out of other morning time motorists. However, the closer I get I notice that the passenger isn't moving. Even closer still I notice what it really is. The owner of the car has replaced his rear headrest with a fully makeup-ed mannequin head. Facing rear. I immediately began to slow and put some distance between him and myself. Out of fear he may memorize my license plate. Maybe more odd than paranormal or creepy. But still. I was dating this girl who was kinda into spiritual stuff and had a rough background. One night we had just had sex and we were lying in bed under the covers. Suddenly the candle went out and I felt a cold thing pass over my legs, but under the covers. I was already creeped out. But she then asked, "Did you feel that?" And I got hit by a tidal wave of panic. Like I was just drowning in fear. And it felt like it was external to me. Like it was filling the room. Eventually I got the nerve to get out of bed and turn on the light. And we went to the living room to watch TV and get less creeped out. The joke is that the first thing on TV was the Teletubbies and we just sat there stunned like it was as scary as what we had just been through. But the creepy punchline is that she later told me she heard a voice in her head asking, "Can I come in?" and she responded yes right before the candle went out. To this day I define my religion as easily spooked atheist, like I do not believe in the paranormal. But I've been super scared in the past.